I want to thank BioArt Laboratories and Baltan for making it possible for me to be here this evening. And you know, I've already learned a lot from the people around me. I mean, I went out drinking last night. I learned a lot about Eindhoven, that the bars closed too early on Saturday night. But I learned a lot. In fact, a lot of the conversations I had last night are in this talk I talked to you all about, because you know, and I got up at 8 o'clock this morning to make sure to cut stuff from other talks to make sure I included those things, the talks I had with some of your own fellow Eindhovenians, Eindhovers, our Eindhoveners were really inspiring to me, and so anyway, I wanted to make that little remark about my appreciation. Also, I wanted to, the museum is closing. If anybody has any coats in the front, they need to go get them. Okay, can we continue? Are we ready? Please. So, we talked about the internet as being this like great fountain of information that unprecedented in history. And Google's effort was, you know, the dream was to put all knowledge online. Google Books was defeated by the copyright lobby. Nevertheless, we have Wikipedia, and eventually all information will be online. Next, please. I mentioned that, you know, believe it or not, something will eventually replace the internet, just like something replaced typewriters. George Church called a meeting several months ago. There are 100 members in our lab, and he divided us into working groups, and I'm in the synthetic biology working group, and he proposed something that's really science fiction. Like, he proposed that we work on replacing the internet. We're going to get information directly into the brain. We're going to modify, we're going to like evacuate T cells that can cross the blood-brain barrier and put in our machinery to modify every synapse, every neuron in the brain, billions of them, and we will put information directly into the brain. We will become almost instantly a new species. And we're already putting our electronic devices inside of us. I'm telling you right now, you will become Borg, and resistance is futile. Next. Borges had a dream about there was a planet. He wrote a story about a planet that was a whole planet, that was a library, and all knowledge was on this planet. And that once somebody found the most important sentence, the most important bit of information, and they could never find it again. And there were all these suicides, and it was like the Tower of Babel. But this same basic idea about the grand synthesis of knowledge has resonated throughout history. It was the idea at the famous classical schools of Socrates and Aristotle and Plato's Academy. It was the Apollonian cult of Pythagoras. Next. It was at the end of the great Hellenistic age in Alexandria. It was the dream of the Ptolemaic Gnostics and their wonderful library. Next. It was the dream of the beacon of learning at Al-Andalus. And in the Dark Ages, it was the dream of the mystical sects of Islam. The Islam in the Dark Ages contributed a huge amount to the world knowledge and world science. Next. It was the dream of the first universities that appeared on Earth in Japan and China. Next. It was the dream of the so-called Age of Reason, the Enlightenment, and the founding of the first great academies in Europe in the 18th and 19th centuries. It was every détente between art and science. It was, next, every perestroika of the exact sciences and the liberal arts, or even between art and religion. These are my DNA prayer flags. I print genetic markers for incurable disease on them. And even though they're about religion, they find no adversity, and they're in many scientific laboratories now worldwide. Everything that I have learned tells me that it's already inside of us. That the human brain is like a cathedral with 1,000 gates. That the reason we can build bridges between things, that artists are supposed to build bridges between disparate fields, is because those things were already connected, or we wouldn't build those bridges in the first place. Next. It's like the tree of knowledge. It's like knowledge really is like a tree, and that from each and every leaf we can work our way back to the roots. Next. This is Castalia, the legend of Castalia. I have a surprise. Apollo turned this nymph into a spring. He was chasing a nymph, and the nymph was getting away, so he turned her into a spring. And this is the spring that the oracles washed themselves with, and they drank from the spring, and they washed the temple of Apollo with it. The muses were called Castellides because of their association with the spring. You drink the water from the spring, and you immediately spout profound knowledge. Next. Yeah, the oracles bathed and drank it, and they washed the temple of Apollo. I went to a lot of trouble. The spring has been closed for 50 years, ostensibly for falling rocks. And even with the troubles in Greece and with my contacts at the University of Athens and the Greek government, I was able to obtain a liter of this water. I immediately drank 50 milliliters and chased it with vodka because I was afraid of parasites. But I have a dollop here with me that I'm bringing to Karlsruhe Institute of Technology. We're like comparing our analysis. We want to find out exactly what this stuff is, and maybe make nutrient for especially poetic bacteria out of it. We'll let you know what happens. We're doing absorptiometry and mass spectroscopy and da-da-da. We're doing all kinds of analysis. Next, please. The same word, Castalia, is the word that Hermann Hesse used to describe the intellectual province in his famous Nobel Prize-winning book, Das Glasperlenspiel, the glass bead game, which was about this austere order of 25th century monks who next slide, who studied at schools for many years to learn the nature of this game. And the game was so sophisticated that Hess never really described how the game was played. All we know, next, is that you had to study cultural history and music and mathematics for years before you were able to play this game, next. And ultimately, playing the game meant that you built connections between things that were heretofore unexpected. It's the same dream. Only Hess copped out at the end of the book. He killed the protagonist and lets him drown in a lake. He just gives up. He develops the theme. He knows it's there, but he cops out at the end. Next. So, what is creativity really? We don't know. There's been very little scientific research into the nature of creativity. This guy was a psychoanalyst. In the 50s, he wrote this explanation. This is what he said creativity was, and I think it stands. It's pretty good definition, and I hate to read off of slides, so I will let you read it. You have 20 seconds. Next. So what is artistic vision, really? What is it exactly? I ask myself that all the time. Next. It's the ability to put things together in unexpected ways. It's the ability to gather multiple meanings into one meaning. If something can't be seen in more than one way, like truth and folly, or wisdom and folly, or whatever, 3 and 1, whatever it is, if it can't be seen more than one way, then to my point of view, it's useless. Next. It's an ability to see into the hidden nature of things, to reveal inscrutable events and behaviors, to to see the paradox in something that nobody realizes is already there. Next. It's about mystical vision. It's called mystical vision. I have been to court twice, once in Mississippi and once in Massachusetts, being accused of being possessed by Satan. Believe it or not, in the 21st century, I was accused of being possessed by Satan in court. It's a matter of record. But this artistic vision is a kind of Faustian bargain. Next. If you put together ideas in the world, well, if you're making connections between ideas, you're making connections in the brain. And creativity is this, requires you to think in really unconventional ways, to consider things that are improbable or even unlikely. Next. These have been called the creativity cluster of traits, and unfortunately, they're positively associated with psychopathology. Next. There are many different kinds of creativity, so we can't say there's a single gene. I can't give you the gene to be a genius. We know that there are many different kinds of creativity. We know that creativity isn't normal, but psychopathology and creativity are related, but they're not identical. That's the disclaimer. Nevertheless, creative people have a higher disposition to psychopathology than does the population at large. Next. They say that different forms of psychopathology characterize science statistically more than certain kinds of psychopathology statistically characterize the arts. Next. Whether or not this is true, there are different substructures, I think. When I left the Center for Advanced Visual Studies, I was at MIT. I joined the Center for Advanced Visual Studies, more or less art, in 1981-82, and I moved to the Department of Biology in 1992, and I thought, wow, because at CAVS I was surrounded by all this psychopathologies that statistically characterized the arts. There were manic depressives. We had a temporal lobe epileptic. And then I thought, wow, I'm going to be relieved of all this because I'm moving to science, and I found a whole new palette of psychopathology, obsessive compulsive behavior, adult dyslexia, da-da-da. It was amazing. And so we're all sick. Next. Temporal lobe epilepsy is an example of one of the psychopathologies that's statistically found among the arts and humanities more than the sciences. It's like the idea that there's a right brain, left brain way of looking at the world is now obsolete, disproven. Like if I read something aloud, like the exit sign or something, if I see something I can read, well, whatever. If I read something aloud, this part of my brain gets activated and something over here gets activated. And in the temporal lobe epileptic, a symmetrical reflection occurs, and these people are flooded with ideas that have nothing to do with what it is that they're thinking about. It's the voices of Joan of Arc. One of the symptoms is hyper-religiosity and hypergraphia, writing a lot. Mahatma Gandhi was diagnosed as a temporal lobe epileptic, for instance. Next, please. Adult dyslexia, it's also a brain thing. It's usually a part of the brain is damaged by injury or disease, and a super-functioning brain, part of the brain, takes over the under-functioning part of the brain. But the super-functioning brain might have something to do with can openers that takes over the job of screwdrivers, and so whenever you're screwing in a screw, you're thinking about opening cans. It's another way, another method, another scaffolding that allows you to put ideas together that wouldn't ordinarily be associated. Next. And then we have Asperger's syndrome. Mr. Spock characterized it pretty well. And the fact is it's connected with obsessive compulsive behavior. The parts of the brain that are activated are similar to the parts of the brain that are activated in obsessive compulsive behavior. And the early symptoms of Asperger's have to do with ordering, putting things in order and making long lines and stuff. Like obsessively dealing in it, making order out of chaos. Next. These guys were famous obsessive compulsives. Tesla used to calculate the volume of the food on his plate so that it matched what he figured was the volume of his stomach. Next. But see, there's this situational deal. If what you do at work is to sort like sockets for unscrewing, if you to sort wrenches or something, you put them in little plastic slots, and you do that 8 hours a day, and you make $10 an hour or something. Well, then it's a job. But if you go home and do it, it's obsessive compulsive disorder. It's how we context. It's really psychopathology has to do with how we view what it is we're doing. Next. Suicide is a good example. Like there are socially acceptable forms of suicide, or there have been traditionally, like Socrates drinking his hemlock, or the Hindu wife who throws herself into the flames. Next. And I went, after the suicide of one of my colleagues, I went to all these Japanese temples last year to get the monks to pray for her. I wrote kanji on sticks, and they burned the sticks, and they pounded their drums, and they chanted. And I went to many different sects of Buddhism, and then I found these what are called living Buddhas. These Buddhists, the only human beings can achieve enlightenment. And in Japan, traditionally, certain sects of monks decided that they were achieving enlightenment, and then they would go eat toxic plants that were really toxic and made them sick, but it preserved their tissues and tree resin and the such. And then they buried themselves in these little holes with a bell and a breathing tube and assumed the position. And if they didn't, and the other monks would come by and listen, and if they didn't go, let me out, some of them did, then they wait for the bell to stop ringing, and which they rang every once in a while, and then they excavated them and put them in the temple, these self-mummified. That freaked me out. It also freaked me out that somebody jumped in front of one of my trains between Kyoto and Nara. Anyway, socially acceptable. Next. Welcome to the Holy Land. The Jonestown travesty. There was a similar travesty at Masada. There were all of the inhabitants of the city killed themselves rather than be captured by the Romans. Next. I mean, we look at the Buddhists who self-immolate to protest injustice in the world, and we look askance at the jihadists who go out and martyr themselves for the things they believe in, but we forget that next Prometheus was a martyr, and that we have these big traditions of dying for Jesus. Next. Religion, in my mind, is a cult of death. I will read this one. Any teaching that ordinary people have preferable alternatives to being alive is nothing else but unreasonable, irrational, and certainly dangerous. Next. So, Brunelleschi built his church. Gaudi's church is being built. I've decided to build a church too. Only next, my church will have no windows and no doors. Nobody will be able to get in, and nobody will ever be able to get out. I promise you I will build this church in Alabama. Before I die, I will build a church in Alabama that has no doors and no windows. Next. So, this is another situational thing. We look at these suicides as if that they were socially acceptable, but 90% of people who die by suicide have clinical depression. It's the highs and lows. Next, and it's one of the ways of putting ideas together, because in the rush, the mania, the manic phase of depression, you're flooded with all these ideas. You have this racetrack running of ideas. It's like rocket sled. Next, all of these people, and some of them are suicides, contributed enormously to culture. Next. But you have to remember, it's important to remember that everybody who suffers from depression is not an artistic or scientific genius. It's a sad thing. It's a disease. Next. So from this, I surmise, this is just my analysis. My analysis is there are different cognitive machinery in science and art. Next, science and art both have creativity running through them like an arrow. You have to have creativity to form a hypothesis. But I think that this underlying practical mechanics that support that creativity can be profoundly different. And if you have them both, you might be pretty screwed up. Next. So now they say art and science have become so specialized, it's too late for them to come together again, that they can never be rejoined. But my feeling is, despite these differences, that it's too late to separate them, that they already are so intensely commingled, we'll never be able to unravel them. Next. We have the same, obviously, there's never been peace there's never been Pax anything. We've been cutting ourselves to pieces for as long as there have been human beings. We're at war. We have the same undercurrent of barbarism that we had in the Renaissance. And we have new and breathtaking profusions of knowledge. Next. What I think about is that because it always occurred to me that what I was doing was a rational and logical choice. I made a rational and logical choice, and I felt that many other people would make that same decision. I think it's inside all of us, this idea that we are the thousand-gated cathedral. It's human nature. Next. We have the dream. Next. All the prerequisites are in place. Next. So what's missing? Next. See, to have Renaissance, we have to have social institutions with the capacity to sustain Renaissance, and that we don't have. Next. Our social institutions prevent people from accumulating knowledge. I mean, my own relatives in Mississippi homeschool their kids so they'll never learn about astrophysics or evolution, nothing that will contradict their strict interpretation of scripture. It's sick. It's a sickness. That is psychopathology. Next. These guys were never received formal education. Da Vinci, Brunelleschi. They would have been rejected by any university system today as they were then. Next. But see, because of the internet, somebody's opened the box. Universities and colleges can no longer market themselves as exclusive repositories of knowledge. They can't sell the access to knowledge, the exclusive access to knowledge that they at one time could have sold. Instead, next, they sell access, I'm jumping ahead. So yes, open courseware and virtual learning environments will replace universities and colleges. These are already obsolete. You can go home tonight and go to Khan Academy and learn the calculus. You can go take courses at Berkeley and MIT and now Harvard. And these are true. The only thing you don't get is the little piece of paper that says you have wealth and privilege, because you paid $250,000 for this little piece of paper that says you have wealth and privilege. That's ridiculous. Next. This is the guy who's the head of biological sciences at Columbia University. He says, we have to ask ourselves about what's going to happen when the internet is replaced. We're not only is our colleges and universities threatened by the internet now, but imagine what they're going to be threatened with next. Next. We've been left with this legacy of deteriorating environments and destabilized world political situations. There's no money for art, there's no money for science. Next. Universities, is because they lose their government fundings, they're turning their endowments into diversified multinational corporations that have interests in real estate and child labor in Venezuela, underpaid labor in China. Next. This cannot be identified with the mission to advance knowledge. I'm sorry. Next. We make the advancement of knowledge because we now have turned to corporations to support research, inadvertently we rely on these same corporations to solve the problems of the world. Now, you and I both know that corporations will gladly solve problems that can be solved at a profit. But problems that can't be solved at a profit will be swept under the rug. There's something wrong with this picture. It's Ferengi economics. Next. These people decide what you will research and what you won't research. And meanwhile, science plays dress up. Next. Whatever you're interested in, like this goes on all the time. There's a big deal about the ethics of art and the ethics of science, but you know, if one of these funding agencies announces that they're going to give out a grant to study pink stuffed poodles, then everybody in every field will rush to redefine whatever they're doing to make it look like dress up pink stuffed poodles, and they do it all the time. They admit it. They do it all the time. It is unethical. It's fundamentally and patently unethical, and that's how we conduct research right now. Next. We systematically create and destroy knowledge. That's what human beings have always done. Next. But by making knowledge proprietary, like there used to be a time when all molecular biology, and I remember it, everybody in molecular biology knew everybody else in molecular biology. Everybody shared ideas. But now laboratories right next to each other compete for the same corporate funds, and you can't talk to them. You have to sign a non-disclosure agreement to walk next door and walk into the next lab. That's ridiculous. There's something wrong with this picture. It means that we're building next holes into the fundamental fabric of knowledge. If you learn chemistry, traditionally, you would repeat all the famous experiments of the past. That's how you learn how chemistry got to where it is today. But if you have holes, then next, all of the mistakes that you would make inadvertently by the lack of this knowledge become inevitable. There's a problem with this picture. Next. We are the most technologically advanced, the most highly educated population in the history of the world, and yet we've never been more clueless about how fundamentally the fundamental operations of everything around us. Next. Next. We have the information, but we don't have wisdom. The fog of information can cloud knowledge. We worry about this. Next. We have the ability to practice research in ways that were never possible before. I routinely collaborate with laboratories worldwide. I wouldn't have been able to do that in 1974. Next. And so universities are trying to adapt to this new system of research by making intentionally multidisciplinary programs that allowing for many molecular biology labs have biophysicists, biochemists, biologists, microbiologists, molecular biologists. So they all try to teach each other their languages, but see the efforts they're making are not good enough because of the fundamental changes that are necessary can't be coped with the systems that we have. Next. We try to sell access to laboratories and workshops. We can't sell knowledge. And we sell community of mind. But the community of mind is us. Next. This is the dining hall at Oxford. I've eaten here. It's also next. It's also Hogwarts. The same. It's like magic. They're trying to sell magic. Next. And they become increasingly isolated because they want to presume to be the most elegant, the most privileged, but they're not. Next. There aren't any alternatives right now out there in the world. We have to build them. Next. These religious cults select which knowledge they still build holes in knowledge too. Which knowledge can be explored and which knowledge is taboo. Next. You have your choice between borscht or borscht. Next. There's something, even the boxes that we put ourselves in are getting beat up. Next. These guys, These were Don Quixotes. This is Michael Faraday, received no formal education, but fundamentally contributed to knowledge of electromagnetism and chemistry. This woman made $10.50 a week and discovered the variable luminosity of stars. And after her, Edwin Hubble and others built maps of the universe, fundamentally changed our knowledge of the universe, because this woman, counted stars on photographic plates, and she died because she didn't have enough money to go to the doctor. This guy, of course, had no scientific education, but gave us genetics, and this guy discovered more supernova, including a whole new class of them, and he's a Methodist minister. He has no formal scientific training. Next. C. Harvard started to pay me this year, and I haven't been paid in many years, but they gave me a stipend this year. It's amazing. They finally decided that there was something valuable about what I do. They changed my designation, too. My designation was artist in residence at Harvard. I'm a research associate at MIT, also unpaid, but at Harvard I was artist in residence, and George Church changed my designation to artist scientist. That's something I'm really proud of. But I used to think, if I was ever paid what it was worth to do what I do, that then it just wouldn't be heroic anymore. It wouldn't be romantic. It wouldn't have been as cool. It would have just been a job. I hate wind machines. Next. You buy your armor on eBay, or you make it yourself. Next. And progress can be excruciatingly slow. I mean, really. Sometimes you could spend 20 years. Next. And what's really tragic to me is that, like I said, I thought I made logical decisions. I just I took one step after the next step, and then they seemed like it didn't require, I never felt like a genius. It just seemed like a logical thing to do. And that soon there would be colleagues coming out of the woodwork, that I would find them everywhere. But there are really few, if any, artists who really contribute to the world in an interdisciplinary way. I don't know of any. And that's my greatest sadness. Next. An exahexahedron, friends. An exahedron, next, is all of the space around an old idea. Thank you very much.